You found us. You found us. You found us. The 11% Pod. Welcome back. The 11% Pod. I'm your host, Johnny B. I am so excited to have this guest on today because literally, if not for a single throwaway comment he had made, the 11% Pod would not be in existence. So I'm incredibly happy to be able to sit down today with Jeff Scheel from Gravity Kills. Now, to be fair, a lot of people, obviously, when you're in a rock band that gets the type of play and the type of video play and the type of airplay and the type of numbers that Gravity Kills put up, everybody identifies you with that band. Understandably so. It's the nature of the business. And when I sat down with Jeff, I made it very clear that's like going to be a small part of the conversation, but I wanted to talk about who Jeff is now as a father, you know, as a husband, as a person who was in the limelight and now is able to be in the limelight when he wants to be, but doesn't necessarily actively choose to pursue that lifestyle anymore. So we sat down and we were able to talk about fatherhood. We were able to talk about being in the moment and the challenge that comes with being in the moment and how hard it is, especially when you're younger, to be in that moment and what those moments will mean to you later on in life. We talked a lot about Taylor Swift. You'll hear Jeff and I joke about two middle-aged white guys talking about Taylor Swift, but from who she is as an artist to who she is as a performer, as a songwriter, as a business person, as a brand, as a hard worker, she's unmatched in so many areas that I think if you're in the music industry at some point, your conversations will turn to her. We talked about, cruise ships going across the Baltic Sea. We talked about life at 50 versus life at 30. Social media haters. It was a very broad-ranging conversation. In fact, I'm setting up the intro now. I don't know how many episodes we'll break this conversation into because Jeff and I sat down and talked for over 3 hours straight. And we both agreed we could have talked another 3 and another 3 on top of that and probably more on top of that. But it was Jeff Scheel who months and months and months ago, he and I were chatting back and forth on social media. We were talking on Facebook, I think. And he said, man, we need more positive reinforcement, guy on guy positive reinforcement, more positive voices out there. You should start a podcast. And someone else had made the comment to me months before that, but I really didn't take it that seriously. But for some reason, when Jeff said that, it stuck with me. And so when we started, when it was enough of a commitment for me that I said, hey, I'm going to make this happen, I reached out to Jeff. He wasn't the first person I reached out to, but he was in the first couple for sure. And I said, man, I wouldn't feel like this thing is complete without being able to sit down with you, not because you were the one who suggested the idea, but because of who you are. Jeff and I gravitated to each other through social media, and the first real-time face-to-face conversation we've had, you're going to listen to it. It was on the podcast. I think we're both in agreement that we'll have more face-to-face conversations as we move forward. But the first time we sat down in real time and we're looking at each other was here on the episode that you're going to hear. I went into it with a couple bullet points. I think, and I'm apologizing to Jamie, our producer, because it really is one heck of an episode. It's all sorts of it's all over the place because the entire 3 hours, I think I asked 3 or 4 questions, and then the conversations just took over as they do among friends. The whole purpose of what we're doing here is to have organic, natural, authentic, genuine, real conversations. And for those of you who are ever in that side of the industry, Jeff Scheel is a fantastic interview, not only because obviously as the lead singer and songwriter, lyricist of Gravity Kills, he has a lot of great stories. As a father, as a husband, stepfather, as all the family roles he plays, he's a genuinely good person whose heart is in the right place. But most of all, I loved the fact that Jeff has a way with words that to me was very reminiscent of Christofferson. Chris could always take a very complex situation and put it into words that you could easily understand. And Jeff Scheel is that way. And he knows when to do some explanation about the industry, because two industry folks will get tied up and start talking about something that's very exclusive to what we do and other people may not understand. And he was great at taking the time to explain those so that when you're listening, you're not going to feel like you're missing out on part of the conversation. You're not going to ask yourself what SoundScan is or what these other terms, lingo that we're throwing around mean, because he's great at explaining that. But most importantly, it was just a fantastic conversation. From the minute that we launched this and I asked him, it took a while to line it up because, he has a life and obligations and I have one and obligations, but we were finally able to sit down on Sunday, August 17th, and we chatted I think we wound up talking for about 3 hours and 15 minutes before we both had other things to do. We could have kept going. And I jokingly said to him after the fact that we could probably do an entire season of just he and I chatting because we were both having so much fun with it. But we got to talk about some folks here in the Tulsa music scene. We got to talk about a little bit about his days with Gravity Kills. We got to talk a lot about the industry, about our society's approach to the industry, European versus American likes, a lot of different things. It was a heck of a conversation. The first of what I think will probably be more episodes in the future to come. But here it is, the 11% sitting down with Gravity Kills Jeff Scheel. All right, here we are. My guest today, father, husband, producer, occasional singer-songwriter for Gravity Kills, I'll say, but I doubt if that is first in your list of accomplishments when people ask what you're proud of these days.
Yeah.
The one and only Jeff Scheel is with me. Man, thanks so much for taking the time to come on.
No, well, thanks for having me on. And, we talked ages ago about you doing this stuff, and I think it's super cool that you've decided to jump in, head first and just go for it.
I will tell everybody before we start with the top 5 facts about Jeff Scheel that may or may not be true. This is the 7th episode I'm recording, and up to now I've only referenced you, but not by name. When people say, "How did this come about?" and I say, "Man, I was talking with a friend, and we were talking about the lack of positive reinforcement, among guys in our society or whatnot." And you had said, "Man, maybe you should do a podcast or something." And I thought that was the only seed that needed to be planted for that particular conversation. So I fired it up and I came up with my top 10 list of folks I'd want on. Number 1 being yourself because of the conversations we've had. So now we're actually doing it. And the first step is, it's official because I have cards. Top 5 facts about Jeff Scheel that may or may not be true.
Okay, here we go.
Number 1, Gravity Kills came about when St. Louis radio station KPNT wanted to assemble a compilation CD of local artists and put out a call for submissions.
That's true, even though I was not a local St. Louis artist at the time.
We're going to dig into a lot of these things later, because that sounds like something I made up. My producer came up with this one. Okay. For all of their success domestically and internationally, Gravity Kills has never had an album released on vinyl until last year.
That's correct. Well, we only had remixes. We never had one of our full lengths. That's correct. Never ever. And we had to beg for that from Sony.
Man, the timing of the industry, because obviously when you guys broke mid to late 90s, vinyl wasn't a thing. It was kind of the wayside, and it, that circle, it comes back to physical media. Number 3, Gravity Kills lead singer and songwriter Jeff Scheel was asked but declined to perform in the Smash charity single "We Are the World."
That is false.
I ask everyone that, and nobody has yet to say yes.
No.
Eventually, I'm going to hit somebody who does.
That'd be cool.
Founded in St. Louis in 1994, Gravity Kills' top 2 streaming markets are not their hometown, but Chicago and Denver.
That is correct.
That is so. I remember Caroline Spine one time telling me their number one market was Provo, Utah, and it just made no sense. Any reasoning behind why?
Yeah, Chicago in particular. That was a Wax Tracks Records thing. We weren't on
Mhm.
Wax Tracks. I mean, TVT owned Wax Tracks, owned that imprint at that point, but that's where that comes from. I mean, the first show we ever played out of St. Louis was at the Metro in Chicago, and yeah, I mean, it was just that market was for us. Back in the days with radio, we're getting into all that kind of stuff, but man, it was crazy. With Guilty in particular, um, there were two rock stations there, one alternative, one rock station. WRCX is long gone. Q101, I think, is back on. They were gone for a while, but between the two stations, we were getting right at about 110 spins a week at one point with Guilty. So you couldn't turn rock radio on in Chicago without hearing the song at some point if you're listening for at least 45 minutes. It's crazy.
Let me ask you that before I ask number 5. Early on, because I don't think most bands consider this. Were you guys like, hey, we want to sell records, but we also want soundtracks and we want video games and we want everything that's come from this, or you just want to make good music and have fun doing it?
It all kind of felt, going back to the Mortal Kombat thing, even. I mean, that was the first thing that we were ever on. We weren't even signed with TVT Records yet. So those things kind of fell into our lap. And the kind of music we were doing at the time, it just fit with those things. Like a lot of people discovered the band on Test Drive 5, I think, was the video game that a lot of people discovered us on. But the movie soundtrack stuff and the whole 7 soundtrack thing is even a wilder story than Mortal Kombat. But, it was a type of music at the time. If you go back to like The Matrix and them throwing in like, Rob Zombie track in the club scene, it was just what we did just seemed to fit the aesthetic at the time. So it was all timing, I think. We were just trying to figure out, we were just writing songs together, trying to sort of play catch up. And that's a whole other story, but it wasn't anything that we did consciously. We just got super lucky, and it really branded the band. The 2 soundtracks, 7 and Mortal Kombat, those movies came out. I think they were back-to-back number 1 motion pictures, and that was still 8 months before our first record came out. And we still hadn't played a live show, Johnny. I mean, we still hadn't signed a record deal.
We're going to talk more about the history because yours is Gravity Kills is so phenomenal. But the theme that I'm picking up, and man, I've had agents, I've had artists, I've had managers, publicists. It seems to be you got to have talent, you got to have timing, and there has to be some luck involved.
Yeah, a lot of luck
across the board. Number 5, Jeff Scheel has publicly admitted that at times he suffered from panic attacks, though not on stage in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans, but more often in intimate settings like a public or industry meet and greet.
That is correct.
And we're going to talk a lot more about that too. It's something I faced. Man, I will tell you, and the reason that last question is such a good segue in, I usually start these episodes off by saying, man, this person made this comment to me. Blake McDaniel once told me, we don't have a issue where we don't have a problem, we have a conversation. And I remember when you and I were talking, and for the folks who are listening, this is the first real-time conversation Jeff Scheel and I had. We were chatting on social media first. And I remember you saying, the guy on MTV Beach House isn't the guy I am now.
No.
And I remember thinking, man, but everybody wants to put you in their perception of what you are as a person, as an artist, as a father, as a whatever, and keep you there forever, and thinking how challenging that must be. And I know I loved a comment you made earlier, or a interview you made decades ago, I should say, when I was doing my research, talking about the creative process. And you said, it's hard to shut your mind off because the water is always boiling, like when it came to songwriting and things of that nature. So with that, we're starting out. And again, and Guilty was on the charts for like months and months, and like
6
8
months.
months.
6 months.
Yeah, six.
Yeah, I think back then you became a recurrent at 6 months. So you weren't so it was us and Bush Machine Head, I think, were the two in '96 that those two songs charted at alternative the longest, and I think both of us ran the full 6 months. So yeah, it was crazy, but that was part of being on an independent label because we didn't have the same kind of synergy that you would have if you were on, if we'd have signed Reprise or Capitol or Atlantic instead of signing with TVT. Although there's going to be some TVT people that I'm still friends with that watch this. I wouldn't change anything. I mean, these people gave us their heart and soul, and but we just never, like, the record wasn't even at Walmart when we first, because TVT was a self-distributed record label, and the infamous Stephen Gottlieb, who owned TVT Records, and people that are Nine Inch Nails fans probably have, he became a big villain in Trent Reznor's story, and he had a falling out. It was a company, Handelman out of Detroit was the distributor for Walmart back then, and he had a falling out with them. So there were no records from TVT that were being distributed. I think maybe the soundtracks were, because New Line Cinema had something to do with that, and I think they probably intervened. But as far as you could find us at the mall, and you could find us at, name your, Tower Records, all those kinds of places. But yeah, Walmart, who at the time was, Best Buy was the second largest retailer of records in the United States at the time. But Walmart, 1 out of 10 records was sold at Walmart, and we weren't in there. So we just had this weird, like, say, two stations would, let's say a clump of stations would pick up the track, and then they would start running its course. And then in the meantime, then I remember the day that K-Rock, when K-Rock New York existed and K-Rock LA, which is still there, they both added the track the same week. And then when those stations add, then you get like WBC in Boston, which isn't there anymore. Or on the West Coast, you start getting, at that point, it was the CBS stations that went up the coast, that were big stations at the time. Or you're getting Live 105 in San Francisco. And, so in the Midwest, where we kind of exploded first, it had kind of run its course. It was, starting to run its course. So it's going up there, but it's not here. And so a song that was, went to number one on virtually every alternative station in the country never charted higher. I don't think we charted higher than 24 on the alternative radio chart, because it didn't all happen at the same time.
But the whole model, especially as it was back then, so blows my mind, because again, it comes down to a little bit of luck and timing. I remember somebody telling me that the talent's the prerequisite. Like, a lot of people out there have the talent, but for that type of work, and for to have it work out that first 1 or 2, 3 years, here you are, March will be 30 years, and it's still some music people are listening to. It's still, I will tell you, and I may have mentioned this to you when you and I were chatting, I put on some Gravity Kills, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, and I forgot how hard you all, like, I'm in my living room and my neck was sore because I forgot you guys came hard. And my fascination has always been on the artist side of things, having that energy, not just show in, day in, day out, every night delivering it, but knowing, and I wasn't in St. Louis in 2023, but by all accounts, everybody was like, man, they didn't miss a beat. This could have been 1999 when the show happened, was the vibe that was going on. With that said, you guys are starting to make some noise, and all of a sudden Guilty's a thing, and the soundtracks are coming out. Was it your goal to, hey, we want to sell records? Hey, we just want to keep making music. We want to have a legacy that's down the road 3 decades?
I think yes to all of those, but not simultaneously.
You didn't want them all at once. You were just kind of like, what's going to make the most sense now?
Yeah, I don't know that you're thinking about, we're doing the first record. We have 3 songs. So with 3 songs, we're already getting courted by record labels. And we have 3 songs. So we're just trying to make music. We're trying to play catch up. We're like, we have to really focus and make a record. And I wasn't living in St. Louis at the time, so I was flying back and forth between Dallas and St. Louis, sleeping on.
And you were going to school in Dallas, right?
I went to college and grad school there. And so, but I was working at the time, and so I would fly up and I would sleep on somebody's couch, or drummer. They have a room in their house. It was a bedroom that they just called Jeff's room. And so I would come up and I would either sleep on somebody's couch or I'd sleep at my drummer's house. And we were just playing catch up, and we were just we weren't thinking about an aesthetic. We weren't thinking about like anything, but just like the guys would work on music. I would come up, would listen to music, I'd write lyrics. We'd suss things out. And we were still writing. We were finishing the first record in New York. Actually, we would have been there 30 years ago. We were in the studio finishing in New York. And we had to write one extra song. We only had 9 songs. There were basically the first 9 songs we ever wrote were going to be on this record. And then we still needed one song because the label's like, we're not releasing a record with 9 songs and an intro. So we spent 3 days writing, recording, producing, mixing another song right at the last few days we were in the studio. So, to answer your first question, yes, we were just trying to make music. As far as selling records go, I think once the record was done, we debuted our first week that the record came out. We debuted at number 192 on the Billboard Top 200. And debuted, I think, in the top 15 or something on the Heat Secret chart. And for people out there that, this is old time Billboard stuff, but a band that had never cracked the top 100 at Billboard, there was another chart called the Heat Seeker chart. But once you cracked the top 100, you could never be on that chart again. So, so then we're thinking about selling records. Then it's sort of like, okay, and we're already on the road. We'd already been on the road playing shows. We started touring pretty much, played our first show in November of 95. And then we were on the road until November of 97, essentially. And so then you're thinking about selling records, being on the radio and that kind of stuff. And then comes time for the second record. We came off the road in November of 97, and then we go into panic mode because we've been on the road the record's been out by now a year and a half. First record, we got to get another record out. So we had another record out 7 months after we finished touring the first record. This is like, it's kind of like, it's kind of old school. It's back, thinking about bands like Rush or something. It would go tour and then, spend a couple months in the studio and crank a record out and go back and tour again. And so that's what we did. And we totally rejected. At that point, we weren't concerned with selling records, which might have, in hindsight, could be a mistake, not a mistake. But we really rejected a lot of things coming off the second record. So at that point, now we're starting to think about legacy. Mm-hmm. What does the band really mean? What does all this stuff mean? And you start losing control of all that. Once commercial success happens for a band, it's hard to hold on to the essence of really what the band is. And, that's probably why, we can name, there's very few bands that last for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
And really. It's probably that for that particular reason. I think people get away from really what the band gets away from what they are. And it's great to be able to experiment and do whatever you want to do. That's awesome. If we could be Prince, if everybody could be Prince or Jack White or Radiohead. But again, we can list on our hands probably the kind of bands that have had those kind of careers. David Bowie, going back. And so we at that point really just I think Perversion has our best moments as a band, because we were really, we had rejected, it wasn't the essence of the band. I think we rejected the commercial aspect of, we didn't want to go 4 on the floor, dun, 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 for a bunch of songs, and which was fine on the first record because it was like what we did. But we wanted to do something else. We'd got back from Europe. We'd been listening to a bunch of electronica, if you remember that term, back in the late 90s, and picking up all these drum and bass records, and so all that really influenced the second record. So now we go through that. Well, the commercial success then doesn't happen. We still sell, I think domestically, that record probably sold by now, we're probably in the 190. We're probably inching towards a couple 100,000 records with that record. But that's the record that a hardcore Gravity Kills fan, that's the record they go, that's the band.
Yeah, that's the right. Sound. Is this record, right?
Yeah, songs like Alive and If, and they were just like more rhythmically complicated, and and then we have a leaving member. Sort of cut to really the 2023 show. Now it's about legacy. We get offered to do shows all the time. What's the big festival in Vegas that they're not doing it? They didn't do it this year. It was now that escapes me. But anyway, we've had really nice offers to do shows, do festivals, and we're just, we don't really think about the band outside of, even doing new music. It's like, we're going to do this. We're going to do everything on our own terms. Nothing is about a money grab. We caught some heat. We did a VIP thing for the show in 2023 and caught a lot of heat for that, but for some people, and which I thought was interesting. But I thought, they didn't know that we had the entire risk on the show ourselves, even though it was a Clear Channel venue. We did a split with them, but we didn't take a guarantee. And so
all the risk was on you.
Yeah, they had risk because they had a risk because they had to staff the show. Yeah,
I mean, that's
those kinds of things. But we knew once we knew we were gonna at least, we were gonna do okay, because we had booked a smaller venue in St. Louis initially, and then the show sold out in it sold out in 60 minutes or something, and so it's like, okay, and they booted some. There was a band that was playing at the pageant that night, and that wasn't selling well, and so we just swapped venues. But so the lighting, and talking about the legacy, we lit the show specifically for legacy because we brought in a creative director for the show, and which is something we always had a lighting director, but this was not just a lighting director, because the guy that ran lights for us, he owned the production company that we used, and Chip's a great guy and very talented lighting guy, and but we brought in another guy named Jeff Bradley, who, there's a band out of St. Louis called El Monstero, and they're a Pink Floyd tribute act that's amazing. And they do 7 sold out nights at the pageant, which is about the equivalent to playing like in Tulsa, the Tulsa Theater here, and like I'm in Oklahoma City today. That would be like the Criterion, and they do 7 sold out nights there, and part of that is because it's an amazing light show. So we backlit the hell out of that show. We backlit, and there was so much smoke on stage that I couldn't see the crowd, because I could barely see past my microphone. And so from the stage, from the audience, they couldn't see the wrinkles and the gray and all that stuff. They just saw, at most of the show, they just saw four silhouettes, with all these lights going on. We had video for the first time, because we hadn't done a show really like that ever, and so we ended up spending a bunch of money to have that kind of show, and and then we had staff, and then the show like that. I mean, you got you've done a million shows, so you got to have the fire marshal there, because all that and all this crazy stuff that people don't realize that you pay for. The cost of a concert costs far more than what you pay the band. So since we were taking a risk, we did a VIP, and it was only $100, but that included the ticket to get into the show. It wasn't, essentially you're paying an extra $65, and everybody at almost said Clear Channel. Everybody at Live Nation thought we were crazy just for doing a $35 ticket. But we really wanted people to come, and we really wanted, it was kind of like, we didn't want it to come off like it was a money grab, because it really wasn't. You and I maybe have talked about this. You have a daughter, I've got a daughter, and I've got a stepson. And Kurt and I are related. We're cousins. He's a drummer, but Kurt's a great musician, and he's a guitar player and a bass player, and really, really great musician. So he's got 3 daughters, 2 of which are adults. My daughter is a tweener adult. She's 20, so and my stepson's 13, so we were talking one day, it was like, man, it'd be really cool if the kids saw us do this one time.
Because they never had, right? Up to that point.
Mm-hmm. No, my daughter knew I'd been in a band, and she's seen she's watched YouTube stuff. If sometimes when she's here, I'm in the dining room, if you can't tell, in my home. And so she, sometimes if she's home, I'm in here banging around. I'm sitting at my workstation right now. And, so she knew I did music, but my stepson, I met him I met him in late 2016, and he was 4, and he had never, ever even seen me play guitar ever, except, 2019, I pulled a bass out for some reason, and we were hanging out, it was around Thanksgiving. We were hanging out doing like family game night, and I pull a bass out, and he didn't even he had no idea that I was even had been a musician at all. And
I wanted to ask, in that situation, I assumed the 23 show had kids played into effect. Is there a conversation where you say, okay, there may have been G strings involved at one point, Boston may have banned us at one point, or do you just say, hey man, it was what it was in 98 and you were who we are today?
Well, I had to address some of those things because my daughter, like most kids, gets around the internet.
Yep. It's all out there.
It's all out there. I mean, and so she knew about all that stuff. I had to explain the Boston thing to her. Because I didn't want her to think her dad was like this, super crazy biting the head off. Biting the head off bat or something, or a dove or whatever however the story goes. And so, so we've talked about all that stuff, and her, she's had boyfriends that are super interested in it, and, or she has friends that, will tell other friends, and it's like, it's a kind of a, I don't know, I guess if I had a dad, if I would, when I was 20 and it was the 80s, if I'd had a dad who was in the, say in the 60s, was the singer for, some band, in the mid 60s,
Bob Seger or somebody,
right? That'd be, that's pretty cool. Yeah. And, but my daughter in particular, I think that's the coolest part of the story for me. My stepson was, I think it really affected him. He might see me a little bit differently, but to him, I'm just a guy that we do baseball stuff and we, it's that kind of thing. But my daughter, Apparently the first three songs she just cried uncontrollably for the first three songs. And it was all tears of joy and happiness, and she was
Pride.
so proud of her dad. And then they came backstage after the show, and she walked into the dressing room and saw me, and then immediately just walked up to me, stuck her head in my chest, and just, cried, where it's like she was physically bouncing into my chest. And so it really meant something to her. And that's exactly why we did it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it to, I didn't know that I was going to get that kind of reaction, especially from her. So it wasn't about, ooh, I want to get a reaction from these kids. It was, I just wanted her to see maybe, you'll laugh at this. Maybe you won't. I think it's funny. She knew that I was in a band at one point on MTV and all that crazy stuff. And so she she says to me, like, Dad, how come we don't live in a mansion? I was like, well, because it doesn't quite work that way. I have to explain, all those things. But, so I think, I don't know, she is very curious about that. Like, I would imagine your daughter's very curious about, at times, because of the things professionally that you've gone through that are kind of off the road less traveled, if you want to say it that way. Sure. There's a curiosity as opposed to, and there's nothing, look, if somebody's listening to this and you are an accountant or you're in finance, you're an attorney or a doctor or whatever that is, that's amazing, because I'm not smart enough to do a lot of those things. But, there's something, or your teacher, we could list vocations, but, you don't meet too many guys like you, or even like, you talk to Chuck Stickle, and, he's, the things, he's experienced professionally are just not normal. It's just not the everyday, kind of, get up, get ready for work, go do your thing, come home, because in what you and I did, even though we were in different parts of the industry, although I did kind of what you do for a while as well. It is a lifestyle, fortunately and unfortunately. It's a calling. It consumes your life. Typically you can be bad at virtually everything else in your life, and it's the only vocation that at times might make you seem better.
Yes. So that is so true.
If you were around if you were hanging out at the bank and everybody's taking shots before work, it's probably good. It's probably, pretty weird day at the bank.
Not a good environment.
Right. Yeah. And so that's what you and I did. I mean, it feeds, at times it feeds the worst parts of you. And you have to really, it's a weird place that encourages you to become a narcissist. It encourages you to become selfish.
To be manipulative.
Yeah. Right. All the above. And in the case of being an artist, it encourages you to be a caricature. And so that was what we were fighting. You were talking about, do we care about selling records or making good music? Or that's why all those things sort of happened, but nothing happened really simultaneously. And I think if you were, again, I think there's many, many, many bands that are able to do that, to sort of keep track of all those things simultaneously. Our band wasn't able to do that. And so it was a long answer to a short set of questions, but
I don't think most bands are. I told my daughter, and she had that moment when she realized Chris Christopherson was her godfather. Like Uncle Chris was a thing. about middle school when I think she saw him in a movie or something. She was like, "Is that okay?" And I said, "Yeah." We explained it to him, and she wants to pursue Broadway right now as a Broadway artist. And I have to tell him, and you want to support every dream they have, but I have to say, Sugar Bear, for every person who does that, there's 5,000 that you've never heard of, and probably never will.
Mm-hmm.
And that's nothing against them, but that timing, that luck, that's on top of the talent. And I love the fact that your daughter was able to see you, because there's, and I feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a difference between watching a video, listening to a sound, and seeing that live interaction with the audience, where that energy just, the artist feeds off the audience feeds off the artist, and it just takes off.
Yeah, I think there was she didn't, when she sees the adulation, because I remember walking. So one of there's, I remember a lot of things. I went through the whole band thing. I was a singer. I didn't drink on the road. I didn't, it was like, I didn't do diuretics because I had to scream every night. So, but I remember walking out for this particular show, and I was sort of overwhelmed by, and I remember, just looking out and seeing, and I was like waving to people. And I think it was at that point, apparently, that my daughter really lost it, because it was like, wow, these people really think my dad is something.
And she's there. It's happening in real time, up close and personal.
Yeah. So, but I get it with the daughter thing. My daughter, she's going to UCO in Edmond, and she really, really, really has an idea of what she wants to do, and so try to encourage all that. But then I have my stepson's an athlete and pretty elite baseball player in the St. Louis area, and he, and he tried, it's like, you're hoping that, it's like, dude, you're just gonna have to work hard, but still all that luck has to happen. You have to have it's like, even just to play, college baseball these days. I mean, it's a grind, and the amount of work that he has to put in, and, it's like playing an instrument, or, in any vocation that you become good at. You probably got to where you got in the industry because you were a guy that could pick up the phone and you could actually talk to people, and you had those soft skills that, that a lot of people don't possess. And, and that, and you crafted that over, it's like, hey, I can pretty good at talking to people, and I can get deals done, and I can, and I can solve problems. I mean, guys that do what you do, you have to be able to solve problems. Like, you have to be able to think on your feet, and it's similar to being an athlete in a way. And, because you have to be not only, thinking ahead, but you have to be very reactionary at times, but, quickly reactionary. And so, I just try, you just try to, like, like, as hard as he works, during, he's had a couple weeks off. He's got a couple weeks off now. He just had surgery. He had surgery on his elbow. He's one of those cautionary tales for youngsters. He's a pitcher, and he had elbow surgery in January, and he just had the screw taken out. So he's got to take a couple weeks off. But when he's going at least 6 days a week. He's training at something.
It's a job. It really is.
And he's 13. But it being, you talk about being a musician, I mean, or doing what, you do, or being, I mean, you have, it's stuff, your job was a lifestyle. Being an athlete's a lifestyle. It's not just, and I'm not putting down what anyone does for a living, and people work their asses off. And, we've known a lot of the same people probably, like, in the club business in Tulsa. I mean, some of those guys, I can name a guy like Donnie Gendron, who, one time, I mean, he's probably now, because he's become very successful, and he's probably been able to, like, he's got people that kind of handle things for him. But, I can remember when he got into business, he'd gotten into a business with his dad over by TU and a place over there. And then,
maybe the Buccaneer.
Yeah, there's a Buccaneer. And then, and then he gets into a place called Fishbones, and then all of a sudden he's buying restaurants, and it's like, And at one point, I can remember, and I bring him up in particular because I was like, I officiated his wedding, and he was just a guy that worked all the time. And that's all, like, his phone was, in that business, those places are open every day.
Yeah. 20,
Right.
24, not 24, 7 days a
Right.
week, 50 a year. They don't
Right.
close.
They're open Christmas, they're open New Year's Day,
Mm-hmm.
it's all that stuff. And so, he was able to navigate that business, and do those things that gave him success, but it was just it's just a grind. And I think, being a musician was, maybe the difference in what you and I did versus maybe the bar business is the same thing. It's a lifestyle too.
The bar business is a hard hustle no matter where you are.
That is a lifestyle. But, I think, that's the thing I don't miss, and that's why we talk about legacy. Now I'm just, we're kind of playing around with some new music, and I'm actually going to be working on music this week, but not Gravity stuff. And, and I used to have to think about what I wore, and I used to think of, the height of the band. I used to have to walk around. There was actually, everybody listening to this might remember the Urban Tulsa, and St. Louis was called the Riverfront Times. And I was in a grocery store near my house, just minding my own business, and a writer, an entertainment writer who I knew but I didn't know, and was kind of paying attention but kind of just laying back to see what I was buying. And a blurb on what I had in my shopping cart ended up in the Riverfront, in the paper. And it was just, and it was so strange to me. And, and then I kind of, at that point, I kind of became a little paranoid. And I was like, I got to look over my shoulder all the time. And you felt like, a little weird about stuff. But, we were never, St. Louis, we had some ubiquity. Places like Chicago, or I could get on an airplane, especially when we were on MTV, you could get on an airplane and maybe somebody would go, "Hey, I recognize you," or it was always weird getting recognized out of context. I was in LA to do press for something. I was walking down Melrose. I was doing some clothes shopping, and some guy like pulls over, slows down with his car. He's like, "Hey, dude, when are you guys playing in town again?" And those kinds of things were cool, but not publishing what I had in my shopping cart, that was kind of weird and felt intrusive. But so
the cult of celebrity that we have specifically here in North America is effing bonkers. It is bananas. And man, I learned early on, take Christopherson, for example. If Chris is walking into a venue with a guitar in his hand, he's Mickey Mouse at Disneyland. He's mugged, and rudely so. People, they think they have this right to come up and invade your space. If I carry the guitar 10 feet in front of him, nobody gives him a second look, because that's the image he had, was the troubadour card, guitar carrying guy or whatever. But, and I keep in mind, I came on the scene in the 90s. After the 80s, the whole years of excess or whatnot were kind of a thing. But the right that people think they have, maybe it's follow you around in a grocery store and print what you borrowed, is just insane in our society. And the internet hadn't made it any easier.
And that's a whole nother issue. I mean, you can imagine,
and we're going to talk a lot more about that. Man, I hate to cut an awesome conversation short, but we are out of time for this episode. Tune in next episode for more of our conversation with father extraordinaire, artist extraordinaire, and human extraordinaire, Jeff Scheel. This is the